All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining part 2 of our Section 2209 webinar. I'm super excited to have, in partnership with SIA, so again, thank you so much, SIA, for hosting this. I have a great colleague, incredible mind in the security space, Miss Jen Daskal. So, Jen, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Great, thanks, Brandon, and great to be on this in this discussion. I'm Jen Daskal. I'm a partner at Venable law firm. I've been there for a little bit over a year, and before that, I served in the federal government, including as the acting general counsel for DHS and the deputy Homeland Security advisor at the White House, where I worked on all manners of crises, but concerns about drones and drone security often rose to the top of the things that I was thinking about.
Well, I greatly appreciate your time, Jen, and again, thank you so much for joining us. So we'll dive right into this since it is part 2, and hopefully you saw part 1 that kind of topped everything off on why we're discussing this incredibly important issue. But so, Jen, for you, excuse me. So within the proposed rule, specifically 74.5 and 74.6, it defines 2 categories or types of UAFRs. You got the standard UAFR and the special UAFR. If you wouldn't mind for everybody, kind of just really at a high level explaining the difference between each, and then what your thoughts are on should there be more, should there be less, is it categorized correctly, and again, any thoughts that you want to give out to the listeners.
Thanks, Brandon. I mean, the way I read the notice of proposed rulemaking is that the assumption is that the vast majority of critical infrastructure and owners and operators will be applying for, and if eligible or determined to be eligible, receiving standard UAFRs. There is a separate category of special UAFRs that are allocated solely to those who are deemed to have a heightened national security interest, and there needs to, in general, be a federal sponsor from the Department of War, the IC, the Department of Energy, or something that the FAA administrator specifically signs off on. They're very different in how they operate, in that special UAFRs operate the way we generally think about temporary flight restrictions currently, in that the assumption is that drones are excluded from the area where there's a special UAFR unless a combination of the FAA and the facility owner approve the drones to fly over a particular facility. And there's all kinds of reasons why you would want to approve drones, facility owned drones, safety, inspection, security, all kinds of reasons why it's good to have the ability to authorize and approve drones over one's facilities. The standard UAFRs, by contrast, have a fairly long list of exceptions to the restrictions. And those exceptions cover a range of public safety drones, but also a range of commercial and recreational drones if they meet 3 criteria. They transit over the standard UAFR in the shortest amount of time practicable. They use remote ID, and they provide advance notice to the facility manager. There's some real concerns with that in terms of a facility manager and an owner or operator of critical infrastructure really being able to have control over the airspace. The whole point of this is that these are critical infrastructure owners and operators that have been found to have areas in which there's real vulnerabilities from the airspace, a combination of physical surveillance and potential cyber vulnerabilities. And the breadth of the exceptions raises some real questions about how valuable the standard UAFR will be for certain facilities.
All right, yeah, thank you, Jen. And I think in one thing too, we were just at the Energy and Robotics Conference, and one of the things that the Matt Fuller said from the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers Association, AFPM, and API, the American Petro Institute, stated that drones are not just a security risk; they're also a safety risk. So if there was potentially a crash, they could cause some safety issues on those oil refineries specifically that are very flammable. And so having any type of heat applied, and if there was an incident, that could be detrimental to that facility and have massive consequences. And so the ability for those to fly over without requesting permission, just for the simple fact that they meet a certain criteria, let's say a Part 135 operator or something like that, could potentially pose some safety risks. Any thoughts on that?
100%. I fully agree. I think that there's, again, even if it's not a malicious drone, if it's a drone where there's an accident, there's real security risks. There's also, as was talked about at this conference a fair bit as well, there's, critical infrastructure owners and operators, as I alluded to, use drones for all kinds of safety and security inspection reasons. And so, in order to be able to do that effectively, they also need to be able to control what comes in and out of their airspace to avoid collisions, among other things as well.
100%. All right, we'll move on. And so the next section we wanted to discuss briefly is 74.100 on page 24, if you're reading it how I read it. It's the notice and comment period for each UAFR that is required. So in the proposed rule, so I'll try not to get too bad, but in regulatory airspace, there is a required notice and comment period for the public to submit before certain types of airspace are established. So following that kind of a precedent or way of establishing certain types of airspace, they included that into the UAFR proposal as well. So Jen, now the notice and comment period, from what I understand, is about 30 days of a notice or allowable period of time where folks can comment on where UAFRs are going to be established, with a maximum of a follow-on 90-day FAA response timeline. I know you and I are seeing similar concerns with this, that that really stretches out the timeline. It maybe exposes too much sensitive information. Can you kind of describe your position and why you think maybe this should be re-looked at, or maybe you're supportive of it? Can you kind of dive into that one for me?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is really just like a really just base security issue. So the way that the draft rule is written, it essentially, as Brandon, you laid out, there's a conditional approval, and then subsequent to the conditional approval, there'll be some publication in the Federal Register that this particular owner and operator is seeking a flight restriction over this particular location. And that is basically like a roadmap for adversaries. Here's an owner or operator that's considers itself vulnerable, that the FAA conditionally agrees that it's vulnerable. We don't yet have any flight restrictions in place, but we're going to publish all this information out into the world. And that just, it creates some real significant security concerns. And so, again, in thinking about how you can address what I understand the FAA's concerns are, which is to give external stakeholders, third parties that might be affected by flight restrictions, an opportunity to address this. A much better approach would be to have a post flight restriction designation process for an entity that is negatively affected to be able to explain and demonstrate the negative effect, and have some process to raise those concerns or to seek a modification from the FAA. And there you address those interests without creating this real significant security risk.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And I think too, you know, let's say a Walmart or a CVS or something wants to deliver drones, and it's right next to where the UAFR would be. Based on the security nature, if it was granted, you would think that, I'm sorry, but your commercial operation is just going to have to adjust to this, because there is a security precedent need to protect this facility that is of critical infrastructure. And so going to the extent where you would want to restrict airspace, I personally just don't believe that would persuade the removal of it. So it just seems like an unnecessary step, I guess you would say.
I agree. I completely agree.
And then naturally piggybacking on the sensitivities around too much information sharing is the data protection. So based on the required application information that needs to be submitted to the FAA, there's a lot of vulnerability type information in there that can be exploited, and obviously that organization, nor I would think the country, would want exposed out into the public, because those who mean to do harm can exploit that information. Can you kind of talk about through some of that, the data collection concerns, and the housing of information and streamline it through to the FAA, potentially not on secure networks and whatnot?
Yeah, so the process for obtaining a UAFR requires applicants to provide a significant amount of pretty granular information about vulnerabilities to their facilities, consequences to the facilities if those vulnerabilities are exploited, and security plans and how they would integrate a UAFR into those security plans. Again, that also is kind of a roadmap for an adversary for understanding where vulnerabilities exist, how to exploit them, weaknesses in security plans, and um, real concerns about sharing all of that information and asking the FAA to hold it all in a single place. There's nothing in the UAF in the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that addresses modes of communication, that addresses all the things that you'd want to think about in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of access controls, in terms of use, in terms of retention and dissemination. And even if you had all those things in place, however, like we know that there's real cybersecurity vulnerabilities even in the most secure systems, and you're basically creating like a honeypot for adversaries of all of this information. And so, again, to both address the FAA's real interest and legitimate interest in ensuring that they are issuing UAFRs to those who have real need, suggest thinking through some sort of alternative process, such as like a self-attestation and a certification under the pain of perjury, something that the FAA could then inspect upon request, but allow the owners and operators to hold on to that very sensitive data rather than creating the centralized database where it's all potentially accessible or exposable.
Right. And you know just as well as I do, having worked in a classified space for most of your career, it while most of that information may be unclassified in nature, there's two things. One is called operational security, where the release of unclassified information can give clues to something that we may not want to be publicly known for national security reasons, critical infrastructure resiliency, and all those things. And so if you collect enough unclassified information, you can easily get into the classified realms, which we call security classification guides, SCGs, for what information is classified and why it's classified. That's all governed in law. And so it creates this very peculiar situation where, like you said, a lot more eloquently than I am doing right now, a potential vulnerability on that side. So, those are the three questions that we wanted to cover with Jen. She's the amount of information within Jen's brain is just, if you ever get a chance, an opportunity to talk to her, I definitely buy her beer and let her impart some wisdom on you. I've definitely learned so much from her. Jen, I want to turn it over to you for any final words, and then we'll close this out.
No, I just think that there's a real opportunity here. Obviously, this is the rule that will enable critical infrastructure owners and operators to go directly to the FAA to obtain flight restrictions is a real opportunity. It's been a decade in the making. It's exciting that it's finally here. The rule is a start. There's some real gaps in the rule, and individuals have between now and July 6th to raise those concerns. And I encourage folks to do so and to reach out to me, to Brandon, to others. If you have questions, we can help and kind of talk through the issues as well.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. Again, thank you, SIA and ZBeta, for letting me host and moderate this panel. So we hope you all, again, July 6th, I believe, is the deadline for comments. Please make sure you comment. Please make sure you read the proposed rule. This is going to have major consequences on the airspace, not only on the security side, but also UAS integration as a whole. So please make sure your voice is heard. It's required by law that all comments are reviewed by the FAA and responded to. So again, thank you so much, and we hope that you learned something on this. So thank you. Take care.